I am very fortunate that in SARC, when I took over about a year back, we managed to get into a project with SEWA, which is actually doing a project now for the home-based workers in entire South Asia. And through that project, I have got the opportunity to come in contact with SEWA. And my secretariat, my colleagues also are inspired by SEWA's example. So maybe I have taken too long, but I'd like to end here by thanking you for inviting me to speak here. And Ella-Ben, Pranam, you have really done, I can't describe, words can't describe, because your book is so good, and that leads us to the work that you are doing. I would like to go to Ahmedabad at the earliest possible and meet your people. Thank you.
Thank you. As I was reading We Are Poor But So Many, I was so glad that Bhatt was convinced to write this book. I think that understanding the way that SEWA has evolved is going to be so important for the future world that I hope we are going to see emerging. So I'm very honored to have been asked to be a discussant today for this book. I say that because I think SEWA is a living example of how organizations can grow in a way that allow the millions of people, the so many poor, to find a better life. SEWA is the antithesis of the major failure that we're seeing in the markets today in the US and Europe as we speak. The first time I met Ella-Ben and Rima-Ben when we visited Gujarat, I realized that I was witnessing something very special. In the beginning, it was the strong feelings that these groups evoked in me, which was most startling. In my job, I have visited many factories all over the world, countries, communist countries, market economies, and I always felt the factories were so dry and so hard and so difficult to make sense for me as to why we would do things this way. And I remember when we went to visit the design center in Ahmedabad, the distinct feeling that I love this. I want to leave my World Bank job and stay here and work here. I told Rima this. She said, you can come whenever you want. For me, this was extraordinary. Women working in groups, creating new products, taking the designs to the villages where other women would stitch under a tree in their own time and then have the final product picked up for the factory where this would be distributed to the ultimate user. So I tried to understand what these feelings meant to us. Although I'm still in the process of understanding that, there are three things that have emerged which are in the book for me about why this experience is so relevant for this new world. The first one is that SEWA has grown organically, very much like nature grows. It is constantly changing. It's adapting to the needs that emerge over time. Many times in the book one can see that it is very unclear what the answer is to that specific problem. But over time the solution appears. As Ella-Ben says in the book, SEWA is similar in structure to a banyan tree. Some branches will die, some will grow, others will grow much more than anticipated, some will eventually become trunks themselves, and the beauty of the whole is never lost. So why is this relevant for the future? We are seeing both in sciences and in models of organization behavior that human beings, we are trying to emulate nature to push the boundaries of knowledge. Some of the most advanced science prototypes today are borrowing from the principles of nature. From construction material that adapts to the needs of the structure, growing stronger masses where there's weight-bearing needs, or materials that mold to heat or cold, just like nature does, or the prototypes of solar-powered nanoplants that emulate the design of an ivy plant to maximize solar absorption and convert solar energy into light. The same is happening in organizations. The most advanced models in organizations talk today about the task of leadership as creating the right nurturing environment for people, teams, and organizations to grow, without a goal or a master plan, but rather creating the conditions for the institutions to emerge in whatever way they must to solve the problem at hand. Second, SEWA represents the feminine. Closely linked to nature, the feminine task is to hold, to be a container that will allow people and groups to grow. The feminine has no goals, but rather values the process of unfolding and learns from it. The feminine has a different sense of time. The work will take whatever time is needed. And SEWA has taken over 30 years to reach 1 million women. It was the time needed. The feminine looks at the whole group and tries to include the whole, waiting for those left behind, even if that means delaying the group or the process. Inclusion instead of domination, process more than end goal, group over individual, integration over fragmentation. So why is this relevant for the future? The world today needs more than ever feminine leadership, because we face one of the most challenging tasks of transformation of our times. And the feminine is needed not just in the form of more women leaders, but also in the form of men honoring the feminine in them. During the US elections, I was struck by how much more feminine and transformational Obama was than Hillary Clinton. That illustrates that it's not just the feminine in women. Feminine leadership is needed to save the planet from our greed in a way that it can be there for our children. To build development solutions by opening spaces so that the poor can find solutions that they own and that have meaning for them, and respecting the time that it will take to get there. And feminine leadership is needed to balance the very masculine models that abound, which have produced a world that we don't want. Third, SEWA shows how development is about transformation. Ladenge shares with us in the book how there are no easy answers. We have to fail many times. Sometimes the women in SEWA have just paid their loan and a natural disaster hits and they have to borrow again. The problem of women not having access to credit, the difficulties of finding opportunities in the rural sector, the difficulties of making a living in the rural areas, the vastly different bargaining power of small producers and large market conglomerates are some of the most difficult questions that we struggle with in economics today. SEWA has been able to tackle these questions by experimenting, thinking outside the box, failing, correcting course, trying again, pulling in resources from outside the organization to help them innovate and find new ways of tackling century-old problems. And by taking one step at a time, having the patience to let things work or fail as they need to. So why is this relevant to the future? The task of transformation is present all through the development field. We face them every day. How do we work with the poorest of the poor? How can rural livelihoods succeed in a way that they bring sustainable income to the communities? Why the government fails to deliver education and health when money is not the issue? How should small producers position themselves when large conglomerates want to purchase their products? These are very difficult questions that require to be understood and approached as a transformational challenge. Letting the market do the work is no longer the accepted answer, even less today when we see the two climate change and financial crisis unfolding at the same time. So, Ladenge, I would like to honor the work that you have presented in the book that we are discussing today as a work deeply rooted in the Gandhian principles of simplicity, non-violence, dignity, human values, which is relevant to our world today more than ever before. The limitations of the market have been revealed both in the financial crisis and the climate crisis. Both are consequences of our excesses. SEWA's example is one of starting from the self-employed woman, building a group, building a cooperative and a movement, and being ready to meet the challenges of transforming poverty in a sustainable way, where work is a source of dignity, building a sense of community and of respect to our planet. Thank you.
In one level, I feel myself totally inadequate to be able to talk about this book. And at another level, I find myself grossly overqualified. The overqualification is because there is a conflict of interest here. And conflict of interest is because of my association with Renana, my wife. When we were not married and we were about to get married, people, all my friends and family people used to ask me, what does Renana do? So I used to say she works with 11. And most people accepted that as a very honorable way of spending all the training and learning. And later on, when people used to ask me, where is your wife? So I used to explain patiently to them that my wife is married twice, first to SEWA and then to me. So there is a very definite conflict of interest. 11 mentions on page 15 an incident that how her house was stormed. I don't know if 11 you remember, I was at the dinner at that time when the stoning was taking place. And for a long time, I kept one of the bigger stones as a paperweight. There are many stories. I am familiar with many of the characters here. But if I were to add a very small chapter, I would, 11 had a chapter entitled Meeru Ben, Choti Meeru Ben. When I started visiting SEWA in 1981, it was an overcrowded place in one small building. Now they have become big landlord. And there was this woman in the basement. She used to sell tea. Young woman, very pretty woman. And so she was already going to be more than 20 years old, but quite. One could have a look at it and see how close to poverty this woman was. And now recently, a couple of years ago, when I went to the SEWA Bank, I was very pleasantly surprised to be introduced to this woman who looked like now a very respectable, almost formidable banker type of woman, wearing a nice sari, having as distinguished pair of glasses as Devki Jain, and conducting herself with great elan and confidence. So to me that maybe in the second edition, 11, I'll contribute a small chapter on Meeru Ben, if you permit me. But that's the personal part. To my mind, I am reading through the book, one sentence which struck me the most. This comes quite early, page number 8. Poverty is wrong because it is violent. But as one looks at the way the SEWA experiment or SEWA movement, there is a little problem here. 11 says the women did not need to come together against anyone. They just needed to come together for themselves. this is in terms of organizational tactics and strategy. It's far easier to induce, excite people against someone, and far more difficult to create bonds of and ties of solidarity and togetherness. And this becomes even more problematic because 11 herself, couple of very moving passages, she describes the matrix of social divisiveness in this country. But moving beyond that, I want to take up a different theme. On page 10, 11 writes, what they needed was the support of society and their government. Actually, it's a very familiar challenge before every movement, whatever its color, whatever its orientation, whatever its leadership, whatever its gender. How do we make this state think different? There's a discourse, an incumbent, dominant discourse at any time, in any society, at any place. There's a policy orientation to the discourse. There's an ideological bias to the discourse. But how do we change that? And that's again and again the problem is there. Devkiji, you stole my passage, but I'll read a different passage. 11 is describing, page 16, the registrar of cooperatives would not initially register SEWA Bank because its members were illiterate women. Of course, this women could earn an income, run their own businesses, save, borrow and repay, but they could not form their own banking cooperative because they could not sign their names. Literacy was more important to the registrar than women's dynamic economic productivity. I have often felt that the real illiterates are on the other side of the table. But this is 11 a perennial problem of closed minds, and how do we open them? At some stage 11 writes that the poor are not part of anyone's grand vision. So how do we encroach on that vision? That is a problem which SEWA movement will have to, I'm afraid, continue to engage in. The second lesson, which step, or whatever one likes to call it, how do we mobilize organizational assets so that you join the battle for allocation of resources in your favor? In any society, at any particular time, whatever the form of government, there are always resources, public resources, which people claim, groups, voices, interest, individuals, they claim, they fight, they contest. There is a contestation. And it all, and where do poor people join? So you have to discover their inherent capacities and own qualities that go into making capacities. And 11's account of the various women is very ample. There are those qualities. There is capacity for tolerance, capacity for fortitude, there is capacity for getting angry, indignation, refusal to give in to an unjust situation, spiritual certainties, family support structure, habits of discipline, teamwork. And that's where I think SEWA is a model, a different model, because as 11 says, SEWA is constantly changing. So if it continues to grow, it is because it's able to keep on re-energizing its organizational assets. But that's not enough to my mind, which leads us to the third stage, which I will call it the changing the game and its rules. Which that is someplace 11 writes people at the election times come and they listen and then they forget. And then she says, how to make it last beyond the election? And that is the whole point. The point is that the state, with a government, is a legitimate repository of order, which necessarily relies on inflexible infrastructure of rigid rules and regulations, which in turn are administered by bureaucrats, administrators, who rarely are encouraged or really think of themselves as agents of change, rather they are indeed happy to remain performing high priest of the status quo. So how do we change the rules? How do we change the game? At one point 11 raises a question very passingly about the nature of, is there any purchase for an organization like SEWA in getting involved with political activity? And she leaves it at that. She says she's afraid to get contaminated by the unsavory demands which parties and political leaders make. But then there's a larger question. That is about the limits. How do we enhance the limits of any democratic movement or labor movement to overcome the inherent biases and indeed in Indian context the infirmities of the state structure? So we all like to believe that the state is very omnipotent, omnipresent. In many ways it is, in different ways it is not. It doesn't run in 40% of the districts. Yet all of us, all democratically inclined people want the state to do my bidding, because I think my ideas, my belief, my policy advocacy is worth it. So how does a group like SEWA or the struggle of these women with SEWA encompasses? So this is to my mind, this question has not been adequately addressed in this. For next 30, 40, 50, 60 years, 100 years, will SEWA continue to remain a genteel organization, petitioning, rather than agitating, registering, in a voice louder than what people are comfortable with? How to make things uncomfortable for those who make our life uncomfortable is to me a perennial dilemma which an organization like SEWA will continue to face. But towards the end, I think 11 also touches on the changing ambience brought about by the process of globalization, and how the state itself has been, she says, the power of the middle class has increased. The state's role for intervening in support of the poor has declined. In any case, the state itself has been bypassed by the fast increase in international trade and huge investments by transnational. Decision-making is at such a global level that local trade unions or people's organizations have no reach. So to my mind, the situation calls for